When you go no contact and they go silent too, don't relax. That's not peace. That's the moment the real psychological war begins. Because when a narcissist stops chasing you, it doesn't mean they've moved on. It means they're recalculating. If this is resonating with you, pause for a second and reflect. Are you uncomfortable because you miss them or because you've lost the familiar chaos? That distinction changes everything. No contact is not just silence. It is not about ignoring messages, blocking numbers, or pretending someone does not exist. It is a deliberate act of psychological boundary enforcement. When you go no contact, you are not trying to punish the narcissist. You are interrupting a toxic dynamic that has trained your nervous system to survive on unpredictability, validation crumbs, and emotional highs and lows. That interruption is powerful. In narcissistic relationships, access equals control. Every argument, every emotional reaction, every explanation you give becomes data they can use. When you explain yourself, defend yourself, or react emotionally, you are still participating in the system. No contact shuts down that system. It removes their access to your emotions, your thoughts, and your availability. That removal is not passive. It is an active boundary that says, you no longer get to influence my emotional state. This is why no contact feels so intense. You are not just cutting off communication. You are dismantling a trauma bond. Your brain has been conditioned to anticipate their texts, their mood shifts, their approval. When you enforce no contact, your nervous system initially experiences withdrawal, anxiety rises, doubt creeps in. You may feel compelled to check their social media or reread old messages. That discomfort does not mean the boundary is wrong. It means the attachment was conditioned. Psychological boundary enforcement means you are deciding that your well-being matters more than their reactions. It means you accept that they may smear you, ignore you, or try to provoke you. You are no longer negotiating for understanding or closure. You are prioritizing emotional safety over explanation. No contact is not silence filled with hope that they will change. It is silence filled with intention. It is the refusal to re-enter cycles of gaslighting, blame shifting, and intermittent reinforcement. It is choosing long-term stability over short-term relief. And that choice is what begins to restore your autonomy. When the narcissist goes silent too, it is rarely surrender. It is rarely maturity, and it is almost never closure. It is strategy. A narcissistic personality is deeply invested in control, image, and ego preservation. When you initiate no contact, you disrupt their expected pattern. They may have anticipated tears, pleading, emotional messages, or eventual return. When that doesn't happen, they are forced to reassess. Silence in this context becomes a tool. Instead of chasing you immediately, some narcissists will withdraw. Not because they are healed, not because they respect your boundary, but because they are calculating. They understand that sudden silence can provoke anxiety. They know that ambiguity creates obsession. If they disappear, you may begin to question your importance. You may wonder if you were easily replaced. That internal spiral restores their sense of power without them having to do anything at all. This is ego management. If they reach out and you ignore them, that injures their pride. If they remain silent first, they can tell themselves a different story. I chose not to engage. That narrative protects their fragile self-concept. Silence allows them to avoid direct rejection. It can also be a reverse Hoover. Instead of pulling you back with affection or chaos, they create a vacuum. They trust that your discomfort will draw you toward them. The longer the silence stretches, the more they assume you will break it. At the same time, they are often seeking alternative sources of validation. Narcissistic supply does not disappear simply because you do. They may redirect attention elsewhere while keeping you psychologically on standby. Silence keeps the door technically open without requiring effort. The important thing to understand is that their quiet does not necessarily reflect emotional processing. It reflects self-protection and control maintenance. If they appear calm, it is often because they believe time is working in their favor. They assume your attachment will eventually override your boundary. But strategic silence is still engagement at a psychological level. It is an attempt to maintain influence without direct contact. Recognizing that shift is crucial because once you understand the calculation behind the quiet, it becomes much harder to be manipulated by it. The real game is not about love, it is about control, ego preservation, and supply deprivation. When you enter no contact, what you are removing is not just your presence. You are removing narcissistic supply. Supply is attention, admiration, emotional reactions, conflict, reassurance, even your pain. If they can provoke you into defending yourself, they are still fed. If they can make you cry, they are still significant. If you are explaining, arguing, or chasing closure, they are still central. When both of you go silent, the supply line is cut, and that is where the tension begins. A narcissistic personality relies on external validation to regulate internal instability. Without steady input from others, especially someone who is emotionally invested, they can feel exposed. But instead of experiencing that as vulnerability, it often translates into urgency. Regain control, restore ego, reestablish dominance. Control is the core issue. In the relationship, control may have shown up as subtle criticism, gaslighting, future faking, or emotional withholding. During mutual silence, control becomes psychological. They may tell themselves that they are choosing not to reach out. They may imagine that you are suffering more. They may construct narratives in which they are the one who walked away. These internal stories protect their ego from the reality that you chose to disengage. Ego preservation is powerful. To admit that someone left them or that someone no longer tolerates their behavior would require self-reflection. Silence becomes a shield against that reflection. As long as there is no confrontation, they do not have to face accountability. Meanwhile, supply deprivation creates pressure. If you were a consistent source of emotional energy, your absence leaves a gap. They may attempt to fill it elsewhere, but what destabilizes them is not losing you specifically. It is losing access to influence. The real game then is about who tolerates the deprivation better. If you break the silence out of anxiety, the system resets. If you withstand it and redirect your focus inward, the dynamic collapses. Because control cannot survive where there is no participation. Silence can be a manipulation tactic, especially in the form of a reverse Hoover or a silent standoff. Most people expect a narcissist to come back loudly, with grand apologies, dramatic messages, or sudden declarations of love. But sometimes the manipulation is far quieter and far more destabilizing. A reverse Hoover works by doing nothing. Instead of pulling you in with attention, they pull you in with absence. They understand that uncertainty is psychologically provocative. When someone who once created constant emotional intensity suddenly disappears, your brain searches for meaning. You begin filling in gaps. You replay conversations. You question your last interaction. That mental preoccupation keeps them at the center of your emotional world, without them having to lift a finger. Silence becomes a hook. In a silent standoff, both parties are waiting, but for very different reasons. You might be holding your boundary, trying to heal. They may be waiting for proof that they still matter. The standoff is not about resolution, it is about endurance. They assume your discomfort will outweigh your discipline. If you reach out first, it confirms their belief that they still have influence. This tactic is powerful because it exploits attachment anxiety. Humans are wired to seek connection and repair ruptures. Prolonged silence can trigger fears of abandonment, especially if the relationship involved intermittent reinforcement, periods of affection followed by withdrawal. Your nervous system may interpret their quiet as danger, even if logically you know no contact is necessary. The manipulation lies in that gap between logic and emotion. They rely on the fact that discomfort creates action. If they can make you uncomfortable enough, you will restore the connection for them. What makes this especially confusing is that silence looks neutral. There are no insults, no threats, no obvious aggression, but control does not always shout. Sometimes it waits. And understanding that waiting can itself be a tactic is what protects you from stepping back into a dynamic that has not truly changed. Your nervous system does not interpret silence logically. It interprets it through attachment, memory, and conditioning. So when the narcissist becomes silent, even if you initiated no contact, your body may react as though something is wrong. If the relationship involved unpredictability, cycles of affection, withdrawal, criticism, reconciliation, your brain adapted to survive that instability. You became hyper-aware. You scanned for tone shifts, texting patterns, subtle emotional cues. That hypervigilance does not turn off the moment communication stops. In fact, silence can amplify it. When they go quiet, your nervous system may register abandonment. Even if you know intellectually that no contact is healthy, your body can experience a threat response. You may feel restless, anxious, or preoccupied. You might check your phone more often. You might feel an urge to just see what they're doing online. That urge is not weakness, it is conditioning. Trauma bonds are reinforced through intermittent reinforcement, unpredictable rewards mixed with emotional pain. This pattern is neurologically addictive. The brain releases stress hormones during conflict and dopamine during reconciliation. Over time, your system associates relief with their return. So when there is silence, your body craves the relief cycle, not necessarily the person. This is why their silence can feel heavier than their presence. When they were active, even if it was chaotic, there was stimulation. Now there is ambiguity. And ambiguity is deeply uncomfortable for a nervous system trained on volatility. The important shift is recognizing that the discomfort is internal regulation recalibrating. Your system is learning that silence does not equal danger. It is learning that you can survive without constant emotional input from them. That process takes time. If you misinterpret your anxiety as proof that you need them, you may break no contact to soothe yourself. But if you understand that your reaction is physiological and temporary, you can allow the wave to pass. Healing often feels like withdrawal before it feels like freedom. Narcissists struggle deeply with loss of control, not loss of you. That distinction is critical. When a relationship ends and no contact begins, it is easy to assume they are grieving the person. But what destabilizes a narcissistic personality structure is not emotional intimacy in the way most people understand it. It is the disruption of dominance, access, and influence. Control is regulation for them. If they can predict your reactions, shape your emotions, or dictate the rhythm of connection and withdrawal, they feel stable. Your attention becomes a mirror that reflects importance back to them. When you remove that mirror, they are left without confirmation of their power. This is why mutual silence can agitate them internally, even if they appear calm externally. If you are no longer responding, no longer defending, no longer reacting, they lose the ability to measure their impact. They may wonder whether you are thinking about them, missing them, or replacing them. But those questions are less about emotional attachment and more about status. To admit that they miss you in a vulnerable way would require confronting dependency. That conflicts with the grandiose or self-sufficient identity many narcissistic individuals maintain. So instead of experiencing loss as sadness, it often translates into wounded pride. The injury is to ego, not to attachment. If they seek new validation quickly, it is not necessarily because they have processed the relationship. It is because control needs restoration. New attention restores equilibrium. New admiration repairs the bruise. What unsettles them most is not your absence alone. It is the possibility that you are thriving without them. That narrative threatens the belief that they are indispensable. If you detach emotionally and remain steady, it contradicts the illusion that they hold lasting power. Understanding this shift reframes the silence. You are not witnessing someone peacefully moving on. You are witnessing someone managing ego exposure. And once you realize that control, not love, was the central currency, their silence loses much of its mystery and much of its intimidation. The power dynamic shifts internally before it ever shifts externally. That is the part most people miss. When you enter no contact, you may still feel powerless. You may still replay arguments in your head, imagine what they are thinking, or fantasize about the day they finally realize your worth. On the outside, nothing appears to have changed. There is just silence. But internally, something significant is happening. Power in narcissistic dynamics is maintained through emotional reactivity. If they can trigger you, confuse you, or make you doubt yourself, they maintain psychological leverage. Even if you are physically distant, as long as they occupy your thoughts in an obsessive or anxious way, the dynamic is still active inside you. The real shift begins the moment your focus turns inward instead of outward. When you stop analyzing their silence and start regulating your own anxiety, the balance quietly changes. You begin to notice your triggers rather than blaming their behavior. You question why unpredictability felt familiar. You recognize patterns you once excused. This is internal empowerment. It is subtle. There is no dramatic confrontation. There is no announcement, but you begin responding to discomfort differently. Instead of reaching for your phone, you sit with the urge. Instead of stalking their social media, you redirect your energy. Each of those small decisions weakens the old conditioning. Externally, they may still believe they have influence. They may assume you are struggling. They may expect you to return. But internally, you are reorganizing. Your self-worth is no longer tied to their validation. Your emotional state is no longer dependent on their attention. That internal stabilization is what ultimately alters the external dynamic. Because once you are no longer seeking reassurance, they have nothing to leverage. Once your silence is grounded rather than performative, it stops being part of a standoff and becomes part of your growth. The power shift does not begin when they notice your absence. It begins when you no longer measure yourself through their response. Healing during mutual silence determines who truly wins. But winning in this context has nothing to do with revenge, superiority, or making them regret losing you. It has everything to do with psychological freedom. When both of you are silent, there are two very different processes unfolding. On one side, there may be ego management, image protection, and attempts to secure alternative validation. On the other side, there is an opportunity for self-repair. The silence becomes a mirror. Without constant interaction, distraction, or conflict, you are left alone with your own thoughts and emotional patterns. This is where many people feel tempted to break no contact. Not because they genuinely want the relationship back, but because healing is uncomfortable. You start confronting why you tolerated inconsistency. You examine the moments you minimized red flags. You recognize how often you over-explained, over-functioned, or over-gave. That awareness can sting. It challenges your self-concept, but this discomfort is growth, not loss. If you use the silence to obsess over their next move, compare yourself to potential replacements, or fantasize about a dramatic reunion, the dynamic continues internally. They remain the center of your emotional world. In that case, even without communication, the trauma bond is still active. If instead you use the silence to strengthen boundaries, rebuild self-trust, and regulate your nervous system, something fundamental changes. You begin making decisions from stability rather than fear. You stop needing closure from someone who thrived on confusion. You stop equating intensity with intimacy. The real measure of who wins is not who reaches out first or who appears happier online. It is who becomes emotionally independent. A narcissistic pattern depends on reactivity and access. Healing removes both. When your silence is no longer a strategy to provoke them, but a commitment to protect yourself, the game ends. Not because they surrendered, but because you stopped playing.